"You are a disgrace to this community," she shrieked, her voice cracking like thin ice over a deep, dark lake. "You and that gaudy monument to your own ego." I didn't flinch. I just stood there on the community center stage, the microphone humming softly in my hand, and calmly handed another color-coded binder to the uniformed police officer standing beside me. "This one," I said, my voice even and low, "details the wire fraud." Her face, already a blotchy canvas of crimson and puce, seemed to collapse. It was the beautiful, satisfying implosion of a badly designed building, something I knew a thing or two about. But this story, my story, didn't start with a bang. It started with a quiet hole in the ground and a simple aluminum pole. It started because I was a father who missed his son. My name is Mark. For 24 years, I was a combat engineer in the Army. I built bridges under fire and dismantled structures designed to kill. When I retired, I took that knowledge and became a civilian structural engineer, analyzing stress points, foundation integrity, and the slow, relentless pull of gravity on everything humanity builds. I understood pressure. I understood breaking points. I thought I had left the fighting behind. My wife, Sarah, had passed from a viciously quick cancer a few years back, and our only son, David, had followed her 2 years later. David wasn't taken by sickness, but by an IED on a dusty road in Kandahar. He was 21. He was everything. The grief was a structure of its own, a heavy, cantilevered thing hanging over my life. To escape the memories clinging to our old family home, I sold it and bought a smaller house in a community called Lakeside Meadows. The brochure promised tranquility. It promised manicured lawns, quiet neighbors, and a peaceful place to live out my days. It was the kind of place David always said he wanted for me when I got old. "A place with no surprises, Dad," he joked. He couldn't have been more wrong. The surprise had a name, Carol. Carol was the president of the Homeowners Association. I met her on my second day. I was unloading a box of old books when her golf cart whizzed onto my driveway, stopping so abruptly it scarred the fresh concrete. She was a woman in her late 50s, with a helmet of blonde hair that looked like it could withstand a Category 3 hurricane and a face permanently pinched in a state of preemptive disapproval. "You're the new owner," she stated. It wasn't a question. "I am," I said, extending a hand. "Mark Brewer." She ignored my hand and her eyes scanned my property with the critical gaze of a drill sergeant inspecting a latrine. "Your recycling bin is visible from the street. It needs to be stored in the garage or behind an approved fence structure. See Bylaw 74. You have 24 hours to comply." She then handed me a thick, spiral-bound book titled Lakeside Meadows Covenants, Conditions and Restrictions. It felt heavier than a brick. "Welcome to the neighborhood," she added, the words completely devoid of warmth. Then she zipped away, leaving a faint scent of hairspray and self-importance in her wake. I sighed, moved the recycling bin, and tried to forget about it. I was here for peace, not for a fight over a plastic tub. I spent the next few weeks settling in, arranging my quiet life, and planning the one project that mattered to me. My son David was a patriot. He wasn't a flag-waving caricature, he was a quiet, thoughtful young man who genuinely believed in the ideals the flag represented. He died for them. In our old house, we had a small flagpole in the garden. Flying that flag was my daily ritual, a silent conversation with my boy. I needed that back. I was meticulous. I wasn't some amateur digging a random hole. I was an engineer. I surveyed the exact corner of my front lawn, ensuring it was well within my property line. I researched city ordinances on setbacks and height restrictions. I chose a modest 20-foot, single-piece aluminum pole, tasteful, sturdy, and well under the 35-foot city limit. I dug the footing myself, pouring a reinforced concrete base that could probably anchor a small skyscraper. I understood foundations. This one wasn't going anywhere. The day I raised the flag for the first time was solemn. The familiar snap of the nylon fabric in the breeze was a sound I hadn't realized I'd missed so much. It felt like a piece of my life was back in place. I stood there for a long time, hand over my heart, just looking at the stars and stripes against the blue Florida sky. It was a perfect, peaceful moment. The moment lasted exactly one day. The next afternoon, a crisp white envelope was taped to my front door. It wasn't a friendly welcome note. It was an official notice from the Lakeside Meadows HOA. Violation, it declared in an aggressive, all-caps font. Installation of an unapproved external structure, flagpole, without prior written consent from the Architectural Review Committee. Per Section 92 of the CC&RS, you are hereby fined $100. The structure must be removed within 7 days. A $50 daily fine will be assessed for noncompliance thereafter. It was signed, in a sharp, angry scrawl, Carol Bassett, President, Lakeside Meadows HOA. I read it twice. Unapproved structure. I looked at the flagpole, then back at the letter. A wave of annoyance, hot and sharp, washed over me. This was my property. The pole was installed to code, and more importantly, it was a symbol of my son. This wasn't just a bureaucratic overreach, it felt like a personal affront. But I was still in peace-seeking mode. I figured it was a misunderstanding. I'd just talked to her, explain the situation. Surely, a reasonable person would understand. I found the HOA office number and called. It went straight to a voicemail that sounded like Carol reading from a hostage note. I left a polite message. No response. I sent a polite email. No response. The next day, another envelope. Another $100 fine. My patience, a resource I usually had in abundance, was beginning to show hairline cracks. I decided to pay her a visit in person. The HOA office was a small, stuffy room in the community clubhouse. Carol sat behind a large desk like a queen on a flimsy throne, flanked by filing cabinets. "Mr. Brewer," she said, not looking up from her paperwork. "I don't have an appointment for you." "I'm here about the flagpole violation notices," I said calmly, placing the 2 letters on her desk. She finally looked at me, her eyes as cold and gray as unpolished granite. "There's nothing to be here about. The notice is self-explanatory. You built a structure without approval. Remove it." "I believe I'm within my rights," I said, keeping my voice level. The Freedom to Display the American Flag Act of 2005 specifically prevents HOAs from restricting homeowners from displaying the flag. A tiny, smug smile played on her lips. "I'm very familiar with the act. It allows us to impose reasonable restrictions, and the committee has determined that a 20-foot flagpole is not reasonable. It's an eyesore. It detracts from the uniform aesthetic we work so hard to maintain." The uniform aesthetic. Our neighborhood was a bland sea of beige stucco houses with identical landscaping. My flagpole was, I had to admit, the only interesting thing on the entire street. "It's a standard residential flagpole," I countered. "It's professionally installed. It's not an eyesore, it's the American flag." "Your opinion is noted and irrelevant," she snapped. "The committee's decision is final. Remove it, or the fines will continue. And if you refuse, we will place a lien on your property and foreclose. We've done it before." The threat hung in the air, thick and oily. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a declaration of war. My initial annoyance was rapidly escalating into disbelief. Was this woman serious? Foreclosure over a flagpole. "I'm not removing it," I said, my voice dropping a little lower. "It's important to me." "Why?" she asked, her tone dripping with condescension. "Are you one of those flag-waving fanatics who thinks patriotism is measured in feet of aluminum?" And that's when the first real crack appeared in my composure. I could feel the heat rising in my chest. I took a slow, deep breath, the way my commanding officer taught me to do before breaching a door. "It's for my son," I said, the words feeling heavy and inadequate. She waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, everyone has a story. It doesn't exempt you from the rules. The rules are what keep this community from descending into chaos. They are what protect our property values." I looked at her, truly looked at her, and I saw the petty tyrant in her full, inglorious form. She didn't care about my son, or the flag, or the law. She cared about power. The absolute, unquestionable power to control every square inch of her little beige kingdom. I walked out of that office without another word. The conversation was over. The negotiation had failed. The peace I had come here to find was a fiction. As I walked home, the flag on my lawn snapping smartly in the wind, I realized something. For 2 years, my grief had been a defensive position, a bunker I'd hidden in. Carol had just lobbed a grenade into it. And she had no idea what happens when you corner an old combat engineer. The fines kept coming. Every day, a new envelope was taped to my door. It was a petty, psychological tactic, a daily reminder of her authority. I saved them all in a neat pile. After 2 weeks, the total was over $1,000. Then the certified letters started, threatening legal action and the aforementioned lien. She also escalated her campaign publicly. The weekly community newsletter, which I usually threw out, suddenly had a front-page article written by Carol. It was a masterpiece of passive aggression. It spoke of preserving our shared visual harmony and warned against individualistic displays that can negatively impact market values. It never mentioned me by name, but every resident knew who she was talking about. My flagpole had become infamous. Some neighbors started giving me wide berth, avoiding eye contact. They were afraid of being caught in the crossfire. A few, however, gave me subtle nods of support. One evening, a man who lived a few doors down stopped by while walking his dog. His name was Frank, a retired detective from Chicago. "Just wanted to say, I like the flag," he said, his voice a low grumble. "Don't let the dragon lady get to you. She's been running this place like her own personal fiefdom for years." "She seems dedicated," I said, choosing my word carefully. Frank snorted. "Dedicated to her own power trip. She got old Mr. Henderson fined $200 because his garden gnome was 2 inches too tall. The men fought in Korea," he shook his head. "Be careful, Mark. She doesn't fight fair." I assured him I would be. Frank's visit was a small comfort, a reminder that I wasn't entirely alone. But the real turning point, the moment the mission changed from defense to offense, came a few days later. I was in my front yard, re-edging the lawn around the flagpole's concrete base, when her golf cart screeched to a halt on the asphalt beside me. "Brewer," she barked. "I am done with the warnings. Our attorney has filed the preliminary paperwork for a lien. You have 48 hours to remove that thing, or you will be hearing from him directly." I straightened up slowly, wiping sweat from my brow with the back of my glove. I looked at the flag, then at her. "Carol, this has gone far enough. I've told you why it's important to me. I don't care about your sob stories," she spat, her face contorted with impatience. "I don't care if it's for your dead dog or your dead son. It's a violation." The world went silent for a second. The chirping of the birds, the hum of a distant lawnmower, it all faded away. All I could hear was the blood pounding in my ears. "Your dead son." She had said it. The words were a physical blow, striking something deep inside me that I had kept carefully wrapped in layers of grief and memory. I didn't shout. I didn't raise my voice. The engineer in me took over, the part that stays calm when everything is about to collapse. My voice came out cold and flat, like a sheet of steel. "What did you just say?" Maybe she heard the change in my tone. A flicker of something, maybe not fear, but uncertainty, crossed her face. But her arrogance quickly reasserted itself. "You hurt me. Your personal tragedy doesn't give you the right to make our neighborhood look tacky." That was it. That was the detonator. The decision was made in that instant. I was no longer just defending a flagpole. I was defending my son's honor. And I was going to dismantle Carol Bassett's little empire, piece by piece, starting with the foundation. "You've made a grave mistake," I said softly. She laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Is that a threat? Are you threatening me?" "I'll add that to the file." I just stared at her. I didn't say another word. I let the silence stretch, letting her see the absolute calm in my eyes. It unnerved her more than any shouting match could have. She finally sputtered, 48 hours, Brewer, and sped away in her stupid little cart. I went inside, my hands shaking slightly, not with fear, but with a cold, focused rage. The peace-seeking man who had moved to Lakeside Meadows was gone. In his place was a man with a mission. Operation Freedom was now active. My first step was reconnaissance. Every military operation starts with gathering intelligence. My target was the HOA's governing documents. I spent the next 2 nights poring over the thick binder of covenants, conditions and restrictions she had given me. I read every line, every subsection, every tedious, badly written sentence. I read it like an enemy schematic, looking for weaknesses, loopholes, and contradictions. And I found them. The section on external structures was hopelessly vague, never once defining the term or providing specific limitations on height or material for things not attached to the house. The section on fines was also sloppy, failing to specify a clear appeals process as required by state law. It simply said all decisions by the Architectural Review Committee were final and binding, that was legally questionable at best. The ARC itself was my next target. The bylaws stated it must consist of 3 community members appointed by the board. But when I cross-referenced the names listed in the last meeting's minutes, I found a problem. The committee consisted of Carol, her vice president, and her secretary. The board was the committee. It was a closed loop, a self-governing tyranny with no oversight. This was no longer just about my flagpole. This was a systemic abuse of power. Phase 2 was surveillance. I bought several high-quality, motion-activated security cameras. They were small, easy to conceal. I wasn't just watching for vandalism against my property, I was creating a complete chronological record of every interaction. One camera was disguised as a birdhouse, aimed at my front lawn and the street. Another was a tiny unit I hid in a planter near my front door. I also reactivated the dashcam in my car. And I started carrying a small digital audio recorder in my pocket whenever I left the house. Documentation is the ammunition of the righteous. My professional life gave me other tools. I still had my professional-grade surveying equipment in the garage. The next Saturday morning, while Carol was likely sleeping in, I was out on my lawn. I set up my theodolite and digital measuring tools and conducted a full boundary and topographic survey of my property. I triple-checked the property markers against the official county plat map I'd downloaded. I located my flagpole's position down to the millimeter. It was 156 feet from the front property line and 228 feet from the side. The city required a 5-foot setback. The HOA documents had no setback requirements for non-dwelling structures. I was not just in the clear, I was miles in the clear. I drew up a professional survey plot, stamped with my own engineering license number, and printed out several copies. Evidence. Next, I dove into the financials. HOA financial records are, by state law, open to all members. I sent a formal, certified letter requesting full access to the last 5 years of bank statements, budgets, and detailed expenditures. The response was a letter from Carol denying my request, claiming the documents contained sensitive vendor information. This was a blatant violation of state statutes. It was also a massive red flag. What was she hiding? This is where my new ally, Frank, came in handy. I invited him over for a beer and laid out what I had so far. He listened intently, his old cop instincts kicking in. She denied you the financials, he whistled. That's not just bad form, that's illegal. A big flashing sign that says, I'm stealing. That's what I was thinking, I said. But how do I prove it? You can't force it without a lawyer, and that gets expensive. But we can look from the outside in, he suggested. She hires vendors. Landscapers, pool maintenance, security. Let's see who they are. We spent an afternoon doing some simple online sleuthing. The biggest line item in the HOA's published budget summary was grounds and landscaping maintenance, a staggering $200,000 a year. The company listed was Prestige Scapes LLC. A quick search of state business records revealed that Prestige Scapes LLC was registered just 3 years ago. The registered agent and sole officer was a man named Martin Geller. Another search on social media found Martin Geller. His profile picture showed him with his arm around his smiling sister, Carol Bassett. My heart started beating a little faster. This was it. The critical weakness. She was funneling HOA money to her brother. It was a classic, grubby little embezzlement scheme. It was no longer about a flagpole. It was about a felony. But I needed more than a suspicion. I needed proof of fraud. I needed invoices. I needed bank records. I needed someone on the inside. For now, I put the financial angle on a back burner. It was my strategic weapon, to be deployed at the decisive moment. My immediate goal was to deal with the flagpole and, in doing so, publicly expose Carol's tyrannical methods. My plan was simple. I would use her own rules against her. I sent another certified letter to the board, formally appealing their decision and the fines, and requesting a hearing at the next open HOA meeting, as was my right under the bylaws I had so carefully studied. I knew she would have to grant it, if only for show. This meeting would be my stage. It would be the first time I moved from defense to offense in a public forum. I spent the next 2 weeks preparing for it like I was preparing for a court-martial. I organized my evidence into binders with clear plastic sleeves and tab dividers. Binder 1 contained the state and federal laws on flag display and HOA governance. Binder 2 had the full survey plot of my property and the relevant city codes. Binder 3 contained copies of every violation notice, letter, and newsletter she had published, all arranged chronologically. I was calm. I was methodical. The rage I had felt on my lawn that day had been forged and cooled into a hard, sharp instrument. I wasn't emotional anymore. I was an engineer with a problem to solve. And the problem was Carol. The night of the HOA meeting arrived. It was held in the community clubhouse, the same building that housed Carol's little office. The room was packed, far more so than usual. Word of the flagpole war had spread. People were curious. They wanted to see the show. I saw Frank near the back, giving me a subtle thumbs up. I also noticed several people with their phones out, ready to record. Good. Carol sat at the head table with her 2 board cronies, looking smug and confident. She ran through the boring parts of the agenda first, minutes from the last meeting, the treasurer's report, which was comically vague. Then she came to me. Finally, she announced with a theatrical sigh, "We have an appeal from Mr. Mark Brewer of 124 Willow Creek Lane regarding his multiple violations for an unapproved flagpole structure." She looked at me down her nose. "Mr. Brewer, you have 5 minutes to state your case." Though I can't imagine what's left to be said. I walked to the lectern at the front of the room. I didn't bring my binders with me yet. I just stood there for a moment, letting the room settle, making eye contact with a few of the residents. "Good evening," I began, my voice calm and clear. "My name is Mark Brewer. I am a structural engineer, a retired 24-year veteran of the United States Army, and a Gold Star father." A quiet murmur went through the room. I had never mentioned that last part to anyone but a few people. I saw Carol's eyes narrow slightly. I had just changed the narrative. I wasn't just some random rule breaker anymore. "My son, Sergeant David Brewer, was killed in action in Afghanistan," I continued, my voice steady. "I installed the flagpole on my property to honor his service and his sacrifice. I fly the American flag for him." The room was completely silent now. The atmosphere had shifted. This wasn't about aesthetics anymore. I have received 17 violation notices from this board, totaling over $1,700 in fines, and have been threatened with a lien and foreclosure on my home. The reason given is that my flagpole is an unapproved structure that violates the uniform aesthetic of Lakeside Meadows. I paused, letting that sink in. I am here tonight to respectfully state that this board's actions are not only unreasonable, they are unlawful. Carol's face began to flush. "Now see here, Mr. Brewer. We are well within our rights. Are you?" I asked, turning to face her directly. The Federal Freedom to Display the American Flag Act is very clear. It states an HOA may not adopt or enforce any policy that would restrict or prevent a member of the association from displaying the flag of the United States on residential property. It allows for reasonable restrictions on time, place, or manner of display, but it does not allow for an outright prohibition. "We are not prohibiting it," she shot back. "We are restricting the giant, ugly pole you've put it on." "My pole is a standard, 20-foot residential flagpole," I said. "And your own governing documents fail to define any reasonable restrictions on such things. There are no height limits, no material specifications, no setback requirements listed anywhere in the CC and RS for freestanding poles. Your denial of my flagpole is based on an arbitrary, unwritten rule, applied by a committee that consists only of the 3 of you on the board, a clear conflict of interest." The residents were starting to whisper to each other now. They were listening. "Furthermore," I said, now turning back to the audience, "I took the liberty of having my property professionally surveyed." I walked back to my chair and picked up the binder with the survey plot. I walked back to the lectern and held it up for everyone to see. This is a certified survey plot of my property. It shows the exact location of the flagpole. It is well within my property lines and complies with all city and county building codes. The board's claim that it is some kind of violation is, to put it bluntly, a complete fabrication. Carol was on her feet now, her face a mask of fury. This is outrageous. You can't just come in here and present your own fake documents. This meeting is about your violation, not a trial of the board. I'm not the one on trial, Carol, I said, using her first name for the first time. The lack of formality was a calculated jab. The facts are. And the fact is, you have been harassing me, fining me illegally, and threatening my home, all because you decided you don't like my flagpole. A flagpole I erected to honor my dead son. I let the words hang in the air. The sympathy in the room was now overwhelmingly on my side. People were looking at Carol with open disapproval. She saw it, too. She was losing control of the room, and it made her desperate. This is not up for debate, she shrieked, banging her gavel on the table. Your appeal is denied. The fines stand. This meeting is adjourned. She stood up, grabbing her papers, ready to flee. But I wasn't done. One last thing, I said, my voice cutting through the noise. Denying my appeal without a proper vote and discussion, and then unilaterally adjourning the meeting to silence dissent, are both violations of Robert's Rules of Order, which, according to Bylaw 31, are supposed to govern these meetings. A woman in the front row, a retired schoolteacher, gasped. She knew the rules. Carol just glared at me, her eyes filled with pure venom. She stormed out of the room, her two cronies scurrying after her like pilot fish. The room erupted into chatter. Several people came up to me, clapping me on the shoulder, offering their support. Frank just grinned. You filleted her, Mark. Absolutely filleted her. I had won the battle. But I knew the war was far from over. I had publicly humiliated her. I had challenged her authority. A woman like Carol wouldn't take that lying down. Her retaliation would be swift, and it would be vicious. I was ready for it. In fact, I was counting on it. Her next move would be her biggest mistake. The fallout from the meeting was immediate. The community was buzzing. The videos people had taken were circulating. Carol had lost the moral high ground completely. But as Frank had warned, she didn't fight fair. Losing a public debate just meant she would move the fight to the shadows. Her retaliation began 2 days later. It was a classic smear campaign. A post appeared on the official Lakeside Meadows community Facebook page. It was written by Carol, and it was a masterwork of manipulation and outright lies. She claimed that at the meeting, she had been aggressively confronted and verbally assaulted by an unstable new resident. She painted me as a bully who was using a personal tragedy to flout the rules that everyone else had to follow. She twisted my calm, factual presentation into a threatening tirade. The most insidious part was how she framed it. We are all sympathetic to Mr. Brewer's loss, but we cannot allow one individual's refusal to cooperate to endanger the peaceful and harmonious nature of our community. She was trying to isolate me, to make me the villain. Some of her loyal sycophants chimed in with supportive comments. But for the first time, people pushed back. Dozens of residents who had been at the meeting commented, correcting the record. That's not what happened, one wrote. He was calm and you were the one screaming, said another. The post quickly devolved into a digital firestorm. Carol's next move was more direct. I came home from work to find a notice from the city's code enforcement department taped to my door. A complaint had been filed, anonymously of course, alleging my flagpole violated city height ordinances and was a potential hazard to public safety. It was a transparent attempt to use a higher authority to do her dirty work. This was an amateur mistake. I called the code enforcement office the next morning. I spoke to a very reasonable inspector named Davis. I explained the situation, emailed him a copy of my survey plot and the flagpole's manufacturing specs. Yeah, we get these kinds of anonymous complaints from HOA disputes all the time, he said with a weary sigh. Looks perfectly fine to me. It's 20 feet, you say. The limit in your zone is 35. You're not even close. I'll close the file. Sorry for the trouble. She was flailing, using ammunition that couldn't hit its target. But then she escalated again, and this time, she made it deeply personal. She filed a police report against me. A police cruiser pulled up to my house one evening. 2 officers, a man and a woman, approached my door. They were professional but cautious. "Sir, we've received a complaint from a Miss Carol Bassett," the male officer said. "She's alleging that you've been harassing her. That you followed her home from the clubhouse and made threats against her." I felt a surge of ice-cold fury, but I kept my face impassive. This was a serious, criminal accusation. "Officers, that is an absolute lie," I said calmly. "And I can prove it." I invited them in. I showed them my security camera setup. I rewound the footage from the day of the alleged incident. It clearly showed me arriving home directly from the meeting, alone, and not leaving my house for the rest of the night. My dashcam footage showed the same thing. The officers watched the footage, their expressions growing more and more annoyed, not at me, but at the woman who had wasted their time. "It also might be relevant," I added, "that Miss Bassett and I are in a heated dispute over an HOA matter, and this accusation comes just 2 days after she was publicly embarrassed at a community meeting." The female officer nodded. "Filing a false police report is a crime, Mr. Brewer." "I'm aware of that," I said. "For now, I'd just like this incident to be thoroughly documented." They thanked me for my cooperation and left. I knew Carol had just committed a serious error. She had escalated the conflict beyond the HOA's purview and into the realm of criminal law. She was creating a paper trail of her own malice, and I was diligently collecting every page. But all of this was just a sideshow. The real target was the financial corruption. Her increasingly unhinged behavior told me she was feeling the pressure. It was time to find the whistleblower. I thought about the board members. The vice president and secretary were clearly in Carol's pocket. But the treasurer, his name was Arthur Finch. I remembered him from the meeting. He was a small, nervous man who looked deeply uncomfortable the entire time. He never spoke, just fidgeted with his pen. He struck me as a follower, not a leader. He was probably terrified of Carol, but maybe, just maybe, he had a conscience. I couldn't approach him directly. It would spook him. I had to create a situation where he would feel safe approaching me. I decided to use the one weapon I had that she couldn't counter, the truth. I drafted a calm, factual letter. I addressed it to the residents of Lakeside Meadows. In it, I laid out the simple, verifiable facts of my case. I included a photo of the flagpole, a summary of the federal law, and a copy of my survey plot. I detailed the fines, the illegal denial of my appeal, the false code complaint, and the false police report. I didn't use emotional language. I just presented the evidence, point by point. At the end of the letter, I made my move. "These actions have led me to believe there may be larger issues with the board's governance," I wrote. "As is my right under Florida Statute 720, I have formally requested access to the association's financial records to ensure our dues are being managed responsibly. This request was illegally denied by the board president. I encourage all residents to ask themselves why. Our community deserves transparency." I printed 200 copies. Late one night, I walked the entire neighborhood, placing a letter in every resident's mailbox. The effect was like dropping a boulder into a stagnant pond. The next day, the community Facebook page exploded. My letter was scanned and posted. The conversation was no longer about my flagpole. It was about the board. It was about the money. People started asking questions. Hard questions. 2 days later, it happened. I got an email from a disposable, anonymous address. The subject line was simply HOA. The message read, "You are right to be concerned. I can't talk. It's not safe. But look into Prestigescapes. The invoices are fake. The work is never done. She's been stealing from us for years." It was Arthur. It had to be. I replied immediately. "Thank you. I will protect you. If you can get me copies of those invoices, I can end this. Leave them in a sealed envelope in my mailbox after dark. No one will see." I didn't know if he would do it. The risk for him was enormous. Carol would destroy him if she found out. All I could do was wait and hope that his conscience was stronger than his fear. The next night, I sat in my darkened living room, watching the feed from the camera pointed at my mailbox. Hours passed. The street was quiet. I was starting to lose hope when, just before midnight, a small, hunched figure scurried down the sidewalk. He quickly glanced around, shoved a thick manila envelope into my mailbox, and practically ran back into the darkness. It was Arthur. I waited a full 10 minutes before going out to retrieve the package. My hands were trembling as I opened it. Inside was a stack of papers nearly 2 inches thick. It was everything. There were invoices from Prestige, her brother's company, for the last 3 years. The charges were astronomical. Quarterly mulch refresh, $25,000, palm tree trimming, $15,000, common area fertilization, $20,000, it was highway robbery. But the real smoking gun was tucked in the middle. It was a series of emails, printed out, between Carol and her brother, Martin. They were discussing the scheme in thinly veiled terms. One from him read, "Need another invoice for the Q2 draw. The usual amount." Her reply, "Yes. Make this one for irrigation system overhaul, and don't forget my percentage." This wasn't just evidence of embezzlement. This was a written confession to conspiracy and wire fraud. She was done. She just didn't know it yet. The next morning, I called Frank. When he saw the documents, his eyes went wide. "Holy smokes, Mark," he breathed. "This is racketeering. This isn't for the local cops. This is way above their pay grade. Who do we go to?" I asked. "The state's attorney's office," he said without hesitation. "White-collar crime division. They live for this stuff. But we have to present it right. We need to build a case file they can't ignore." We spent the entire weekend doing just that. My methodical binder system went into overdrive. We organized everything. The fraudulent invoices. The emails. The state business filings for her brother's company. My illegally denied request for the financials. We added my own narrative of the harassment, the false police report, the smear campaign. It established a pattern of her using intimidation to protect her criminal enterprise. By Sunday night, we had a package of evidence so thorough, so damning, it was a work of art. It was an engineering schematic for her own destruction. On Monday morning, wearing my best suit, I walked into the state's attorney's office and asked to speak with an investigator. I was eventually led to the office of a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Investigator Diaz. I didn't give her a long, rambling story. I just put the primary binder on her desk and said, "I believe I have evidence of significant, long-term embezzlement, wire fraud, and conspiracy in a homeowners association." She raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. But she opened the binder. She started reading. I watched as her expression shifted from professional detachment to intense focus, and then to a grim, predatory smile. She was a hunter who had just stumbled upon a prize kill. She spent an hour going through the materials, asking sharp, specific questions. When she was done, she closed the binder and looked at me. "Mr. Brewer," she said, "thank you for bringing this to us. And thank you for being so damn organized. You've done 90% of our work for us. We'll be opening a formal investigation immediately." As I left her office and stepped out into the sunshine, I felt a profound sense of calm. The trap was set. The wheels of justice were turning. All I had to do now was wait for the final act. The next few weeks were quiet. Eerily so. Carol must have been aware that the community was turning against her, but she had no idea of the storm that was about to break. She continued her petty tyranny, sending me the daily fine notices for the flagpole, which I continued to file away. It was like watching a ghost go through the motions, unaware that it was already dead. Investigator Diaz called me once a week with quiet updates. They had subpoenaed the HOA's bank records and the records for Prestige. The money trail was exactly what the email suggested: huge payments from the HOA account, followed by large kickbacks to a personal account owned by Carol. They had also spoken with Arthur Finch, who, with the promise of immunity, had agreed to testify and had provided even more details about the scheme. The investigation was culminating, and Diaz had an idea for the final showdown. The next HOA annual meeting was scheduled in a month. It was the big one, where board elections were held. She'll be there, front and center, trying to rally her supporters and get re-elected, Diaz said over the phone. The place will be packed. It's the perfect venue. We'd like to execute the arrest warrant then. Publicly. It was poetic justice. Her power was derived from her public position. It was only fitting that she be stripped of it in the most public way possible. I agreed. The night of the annual meeting felt electric. The clubhouse was overflowing. Every seat was taken, and people were standing along the walls. My letter and the subsequent fallout had ensured a record turnout. Everyone knew something big was going to happen. I saw Investigator Diaz and another plainclothes officer take seats in the back, looking like any other residents. Arthur Finch was in the front row, looking pale but resolute. Frank gave me a solid nod from across the room. Carol took her seat at the head table, a strained, plastic smile plastered on her face. She was in full campaign mode, trying to project an aura of calm control, but I could see the tension in her jaw, the slight tremor in her hands. She knew her grip was slipping. She tried to rush through the agenda, to get to the board elections where she assumed she still had enough proxy votes to win. But when she opened the floor for new business, I stood up. I have a matter to discuss, I said, my voice carrying across the silent, expectant room. Carol's eyes shot daggers at me. Mr. Brewer, your flagpole issue has already been heard and denied. You are out of order. This isn't about my flagpole, I said, walking slowly towards the front of the room. This is about your leadership. This is about the financial integrity of our community. I had a projector and a laptop with me. I had already set it up. I turned it on, and the first image that flashed on the screen behind Carol was the cover page of my binder, Lakeside Meadows HOA, a financial review. As you all know, I began, my voice steady and amplified by the microphone, I was denied access to our association's financial records. I was told this was to protect sensitive vendor information. I've since discovered what that sensitive information was. I clicked to the next slide. It was a corporate filing for Prestige Scapes LLC, showing the owner's name, Martin Geller. I clicked again. A family photo from Carol's Facebook page, showing her with her arm around her smiling brother, Martin. A collective gasp went through the room. For the last 3 years, I said, my voice like a judge's gavel, our single largest expense has been landscaping services from a company owned by our president's brother. Carol was on her feet, her face white with shock and rage. This is slander. These are lies. You have no proof. Oh, but I do, I said calmly. I clicked to the next slide. It was the first of the fraudulent invoices. $25,000 for mulch, I clicked again. Another invoice. $15,000 for trimming trees that were never touched. I went through a dozen of them, the ridiculous charges piling up, the evidence becoming overwhelming. The room was in an uproar. People were shouting, demanding answers. Carol started screaming. They're fake. He forged those documents. He's a crazy person trying to destroy our community. And I suppose you'll say these emails are forged as well. I said, my voice cutting through her shrieks. I clicked to the final, damning slide. It was the email exchange between her and her brother. Make this one for irrigation system overhaul, and don't forget my percentage. The room fell into a stunned silence. The words hung there on the screen, an undeniable confession in her own words. And then, Carol completely shattered. It wasn't a slow crumble. It was a demolition. Her face, her composure, her entire being just imploded under the pressure. You, she screamed, pointing a trembling finger at me. You did this. You are a disgrace to this community. You and that gaudy monument to your own ego. She lunged for my laptop on the table, as if destroying the source of the projection would make the truth disappear. But before she could reach it, a calm voice spoke from the back of the room. That's enough. Investigator Diaz and her partner were walking down the aisle, their badges now displayed. Carol Bassett, Diaz said, her voice full of authority, you are under arrest for embezzlement, wire fraud, and conspiracy. The sight of the police badges seemed to break the last thread of her sanity. She stared at them, then at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of hatred and disbelief. As the second officer took her arm to place her in handcuffs, she gave one last, pathetic screech. You'll regret this, Brewer, she howled, her voice raw. "I'll sue you for everything you have. I'll own this house." It was the hollow, impotent threat of a queen whose castle had just been reduced to rubble. No one believed her. No one feared her anymore. As they led her out of the room, crying and struggling, the residents of Lakeside Meadows just stared, silent and shocked. Then, someone started to clap. It was Frank. Then another person joined in, and another, until the entire room was filled with applause. It wasn't for her downfall. It was for the end of her reign. The aftermath was swift and decisive. An interim board was appointed that night, with Frank as the acting president. Their first official act was to vote unanimously to dismiss every fine against me. Their second was to issue a formal, public apology on behalf of the community. The legal case against Carol was a slam dunk. Faced with the mountain of evidence, her brother turned on her for a plea deal. Arthur's testimony sealed her fate. The final tally of her theft was over $500,000, stolen from her neighbors over 3 years. She was sentenced to 8 years in state prison. The court ordered her assets seized, including her beige stucco house, to pay restitution to the HOA she had plundered. Life in Lakeside Meadows changed. The atmosphere of fear and petty tyranny evaporated overnight. The new board, with Frank officially elected as president, went through the CC&RS and systematically removed the vague, oppressive rules, replacing them with reasonable guidelines. The community started to feel like a community. Neighbors started talking to each other again. A few weeks after the sentencing, the board held a small ceremony. They had installed a bronze plaque at the base of the community flagpole by the clubhouse. It read, "In honor of Sergeant David Brewer and all who have made the ultimate sacrifice for the freedoms we cherish." I stood there, looking at my son's name, and felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt since before he was gone. The fight had been ugly, but the outcome was just. Sometimes, I stand on my porch in the evening, watching my flag ripple in the breeze against the setting sun. It stands tall and straight, its foundation solid and deep. It was never about a piece of metal and cloth. It was about the principle. It was about the memory of a young man who believed in those principles enough to die for them. Carol thought she was fighting over a rule. She never understood that she was picking a fight with a father's love, and there is no force on earth more relentless. Bullies and tyrants, big or small, thrive on the silence and fear of others. They build their power on foundations of intimidation. But when you stand up, when you use reason as a weapon and truth as a shield, their structures collapse. All it takes is finding the right pressure point. My son had wanted me to have a place with no surprises. He was wrong. Life is full of them. But he also taught me that you don't run from a fight when something important is on the line. I finally have the quiet life I came here for. I have my peace. And every day, I have my flag, a silent testament to a battle won, and a son who is never, ever forgotten.